6 days ago, the Supreme Court handed the Republican Party unlimited coordinated spending. I covered the ruling the day that it dropped. So if you saw that video, you already know the headline. It was 6-3. And Justice Kavanaugh was writing for the majority. And the spending caps that stood for 50 years are now gone. Here's what nobody has done the math on yet. There's 3 Republican committees sitting on $256 million in cash. And they have no debt. And the Democratic committees, they only have about half of that. And they're $18 million in debt on top of it. So the court didn't just change the rule last Tuesday. It really armed the Republican Party for victory. I'm J.R. Majewski. I ran for Congress. I had President Trump's endorsement. And I've sat inside of the rooms with these campaign finance systems. I understand how they work. And the cable news lawyers are describing them secondhand. And they're getting it wrong. But I think they're doing it intentionally. They're missing the part that actually decides these Senate races. And I think they don't want us to know that we're actually going to flip these seats. And today I want to show you where that money goes, how the pipeline works. I want to talk about the 4 races that Trump is going to flip and set history. But first, I want to start with a quick refresher for anybody who may have missed the first video. And then we'll get into the new stuff. Now, what the court struck down in NRSC versus the FEC was coordinated expenditure limits. This was a post-Watergate law from 1974. Now, Congress, in their infinite wisdom, decided that political parties were a danger, so they capped how much a party could spend in direct cooperation with its own candidates. Now, here's what that means in the real world, and this is the part that I know firsthand. When I ran, the party could only spend a capped amount, with my campaign. That was coordinated. For House races, the cap was roughly $65,000 to $130,000, depended. Now, the Senate races, they were $130 to $4 million, and that depended on the state. Every dollar beyond these caps had to be spent independently. Now, I want you to understand what independently means because the definition is important. This is where the whole thing actually becomes pretty stupid. It means the party committee that exists for the sole purpose of electing someone is legally barred from talking to them about how it's going to spend money electing them. Make sense? Yeah, I didn't think so. It means they have to have separate ad agencies, separate polling firms that, are running the same polls that a campaign relies on and probably already has to pay for. It has to have duplicate mail programs that oftentimes contradict one another because the two sides can't compare notes. I've watched money burn, donor money burn on that firewall. And to me, donor money is important because you're asking people to confide in you, to trust in you, to run for office. And you're out spending their money wild because the system requires you to do that. Now, every candidate in America, regardless of party, will tell you the same story. As of June 13th, that firewall's gone. The NRSC, the NRCC, the RNC, they can all now sit in the room with the campaign and the candidate and jointly plan every single dollar that's going to be spent. One polling program, one mail plan, one ad strategy, full operating efficiency. And folks, the Republican Party, specifically the NRSC, didn't wait for a week to move on this like the Democrats did. The day of the ruling, they sent a memo to all candidates across the country with a simple instruction. Lean on the party. Let these committees absorb your costs, whether it's polling, TV, radio, direct mail. The party now wants to carry these things. And that memo, folks, that's the starting gun of what's going to be a sprint. Now, I want to talk about the math that I think the media is either too stupid to realize or they're skipping intentionally. The RNC, the NRSC, and the NRCC, all of them combined had $256 million cash on hand, no debt. Their Democratic counterparts had about $126 million with $18 million in debt. Now that gives the Republicans better than a 2-to-1 advantage in cash. And that's before you even talk about these potential efficiencies. And these efficiencies matter because coordinated dollars, they're worth a hell of a lot more than independent dollars. Because coordinated spending buys airtime at candidate rates. Now that means that candidates get the lowest rates that stations are legally required to offer. Independent expenditures, on the other hand, they have to pay market rates. And sometimes those market rates could be double or triple in a hot market in October when political races are amping up. So the court didn't just unlock these Republican war chests, they effectively upgraded the exchange rate on every dollar that's going to be spent. Now, the Democrats, they have an answer to all this, and they're calling it their small dollar fundraising. I have to give them credit where it's due. They have a machine, and it's real. Act Blue prints money. And Democrat candidates constantly outraise Republicans at the candidate level. And that's been our biggest weakness for over a decade. You have Senator John Ossoff, okay? He's an example. He posts fundraising quarters, and they make national headlines. And it's real. But this ruling is the counter to that. Candidate level fundraising was the one lane Caps forced the fight, and Democrats always won. But now the fight moves to the committee lane. And that's where Republicans hold a 2-to-1 edge and have a hell of a lot better spending mechanic. And the Democrats, well, their fundraising mechanism, their advantage, it just got outflanked. And I think we're all going to see it ride its way into victory. But here's the mechanism, okay, that I don't think anybody on TV or even talking about it understands. Okay, this is a part I want to take straight from the Supreme Court justice that wrote the dissent. Okay. Under the rules that are still in effect, an individual donor can give a max amount of about $7,000 directly to the candidate per cycle. That cap stays in place. But now the same donor can give hundreds of thousands of dollars to a national party committee. It can be up to, I think, $500,000. Okay. And that means a donor who maxed out at $7,000 to a candidate can now route $500,000 through the party, and then that party can spend it in coordination with the candidate. Justice Kagan said that this makes the party the candidate's new checking account. Now, I agree with her. I think that she's right on that description, but I reject her conclusion because while the party is the new checking account, she's only saying this because Republicans have $256 million without debt. And now a memo from these three committees telling every candidate the PIN number. But now I have one more piece, okay, because there's going to be somebody in the comments that's going to ask, to make this statement, isn't this just legalized earmarking? And Justice Kavanaugh addressed this directly, okay? I'll tell you later. You missed a little bit, but I'll tell you about that later, okay? Earmark donations, this is where the donor can instruct the party to spend a specific amount that they've donated to a specific candidate. That doesn't get to circumvent the law. It's still treated as a direct contribution. So it means it's still capped and it's still disclosed. And the majority's position is that base limits, earmarking rules, and disclosure laws are the anti-corruption guardrails. They're just looking at, the coordination cap as a speech restriction that was stacked on top of them. Now, you can argue that with reasoning. And, the 6 justices who actually count on, and their argument counts, well, they didn't. Okay. Now, the question you have to ask is, where does a smart party deploy unlimited coordination? And I have an idea. 4 races. And if you watch my Senate targets video, this is going to make a direct correlation. Okay, first is North Carolina. You have Democrat Roy Cooper running against Republican Mike Whatley. And within hours of the ruling, Cooper's campaign put out a public statement saying this race was already on track to be the first $1 billion Senate race in American history. And I think he's right. And the Supreme Court probably just guaranteed it. But you have to sit with that for a second, because that's the Democratic campaign manager telling his donors in writing that he knows what's coming. But a little pivot here is look at who the Republican nominee is, Mike Whatley. He ran the RNC. Okay, there's not a candidate in the United States that's better wired into this committee money than the man who used to write the checks. So unlimited coordination between the NRSC and a former RNC chair, that's a loophole in the system. That's not a loophole in the system, okay? It's the system operating at full potential and full power for the first time since 74. And I think this is going to be one to watch. It's going to be a lot of money spent, but I think Mike Whatley's going to pull it off. A second, right? The race in Georgia. You have Senator John Ossoff. He's the most exposed Democratic incumbent in the races this year. Okay. He's defending a seat in a state that President Trump carried against Congressman Mike Collins, a good friend of mine. Now, Ossoff and his small dollar machine has been posting monster fundraising quarters. And the press, every time, right, writes it as, these huge juggernaut stories every 3 months, like clockwork, as if it's an indication that Ossoff is going to win. Now, under the old rules, that kind of money was decisive. But now, because the NRSC can actually match this dollar for dollar, okay, it changes the game. They can get candidate ad rates. They can coordinate with Mike Collins for a unified strategy. So Georgia is going to be where Republicans' ability to outflank gets tested first. And I think this is going to end up being, I think it's going to be bigger than the last race. And it's going to be the most valuable nomination, most valuable race in the country. But time will tell. Now, third, you have a race in Michigan, an open seat. Gary Peters walking away and not wanting to defend his seat. So open seats are where coordinated money is going to be the most lethal. And there's a reason for that. Okay. The whole challenge in these open seat races is defining the unknown candidate before the competition can. And that takes what's known as early money. Okay. And early money is what candidates usually don't have because they're still in the process of raising it. But party committees, they're always funded. Under the new rules, the committee can build the Republican nominee's name ID with party cash at a candidate rate starting the day after the primary. Okay? Fully scripted with the campaign. And the Democrats are going to have to do the same thing, but they only have half the bank account in debt. See, in Michigan, we have Mike Rogers, former congressman. He has a name ID. He ran this race last cycle. He lost by a fraction of a percentage of 1%. And he has raised a pretty decent amount of money because he's uncontested in his primary. So Michigan is going to be another race. And Trump carried Michigan by 1. So time will tell. But fourth, we have New Hampshire. Okay, this is the sleeper race, in my opinion. Why I said 4 races instead of 3, or 3 instead of 4. Okay. What New Hampshire has that these others don't is dirt cheap media. Okay, there's some spillover from Boston and their media market being expensive, but the in-state market costs in New Hampshire are a fraction of what both parties would pay in a major city. Okay, when money stops being capped like this, these cheap states like New Hampshire become huge opportunities for power plays. $1 million in New Hampshire of coordinated spending, probably the equivalent between 5 to 10 in somewhere like Atlanta. Okay, so we're going to watch the NRSC treat this media market exactly that way. They're going to hit it and hit it hard. And they're going to inundate any likely voters with information on their campaign. So I've got 2 predictions here. And maybe you'll follow my logic. Number 1, I think by Labor Day, we're going to see these Senate candidates getting a little quiet, okay, in these 4 states. They're going to pull back and probably reappear a few weeks later. And they're going to do so with these joint party candidate buys, okay? And we'll be able to tell this by the FEC reports. So candidate committee spending is going to flatten, and then the party coordinated spending is going to explode. In the media, I think this is where they're going to pick it up around October. And they're immediately going to call it a loophole. They're going to say Republicans are cheating, blah, blah, blah. But it's not a loophole. It's a law. And both parties can use it. We just have $256 million. Okay. Second, I think the Democrats' response is not going to be their fundraising surge like they think. I think they're going to resort to lawfare because it's familiar and it's free for the most part. And remember when I told you Justice Kavanaugh left a little bit? Well, he did. Okay. Just one thread, and it's the earmarking rule. And Democrat lawyers are going to spend the next few months pulling it. And I would anticipate that they're going to inundate us with FEC complaints, accusing the party and the candidate of coordinating illegally and disguising it as earmarks. So they'll probably do that in October and November, or right before the election. And they're going to do that with intention. They're going to want to flood the headlines with accusations that don't get vetted through the court process. So when you see those, remember where you heard it in July, right here. So we step back, though, and we look at what actually is happening. We have 50 years of ruling that said the political party, the institution whose entire purpose is winning elections, had to fight with one hand behind its back. And those rules were sold as anti-corruption. What they really did, folks, is they pushed the money out of the accountable window. Okay. They were no longer disclosed, out of party channels. And they went into the shadows. And that's how we got ourselves with these super PACs, these dark money groups, organizations that answer to nobody. But the court did the right thing. They cut the rope. So now it comes down to execution. Money doesn't cast a single vote. Money buys the chance to make the argument for that vote. And for the first time in my life, and probably most of yours, the Republican Party gets to make that argument at full strength with coordination in every state that's going to decide the U.S. Senate. Now, the map I showed you in the Senate video that I did, every rating on it was built under the old money rules. So the analysts haven't repriced these races yet, but we just did right here. So look, if you want the race by race breakdown as money starts moving, I'm going to try to hit that at least once or twice a week. So make sure you subscribe, turn on your notifications, and keep an eye out, because the story is going to move fast. And I think the next thing we're going to talk about in the next video is the ruling. I don't think anybody missed it, but I think they've missed the outcome, potential outcome. Okay. You have the mail-in ballot extension. That's going to favor the Democrats. And you have the unlimited spending potential now with Republicans. And those things are going to collide in the same 4 states that I just showed you. Okay. And I don't think anybody's recognizing that collision. So I think we're going to talk about that in the next video. Until then, we'll see you. Have a good day.